Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a webinar dedicated to the packaging and packaging waste regulation, most commonly known as the PPWR. With me today to have this webinar, we have three experts, and that's wonderful. We have Thomas de Meester, Public and Regulatory Affairs Manager at Fost Plus, Anne-Marie Abel, Senior Expert Design for Recycling at Fost Plus. We will have a short coming back to Thomas, and to end, we will let the floor at Ingrid Boucher, Communication Manager at Valipac. At the end of the session, we will have a little Q&A, so feel free to type your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer as much as we can. And if we don't tackle your question, feel free to send us an email, and we will come back to you as soon as we can. Thank you very much. I'll let you enjoy this webinar with Thomas, and I leave the floor to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. Yes, so after more than 2 years of long and intense negotiations, the PPWR, the final text, has finally been published last week on the 22nd of January. The PPWR is a very lengthy and complex text, so unfortunately we won't have the time in this limited time span of an hour to go really into the details, but we have picked a couple of key areas that we would like to introduce and discuss today. An overview here, we will start with recyclability and recycled content, moving on to labeling, packaging restrictions, prevention and minimization, reuse and refill, and last but not least, for the aspect of household packaging, deposit return systems. So, one of the most important changes from moving from the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive to the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation is, of course, the change of legal instrument. Whereas previously we were working within the boundaries of a directive specified the required outcomes, and it's then up to the member state to transpose into national law with the provisions on how to reach those desired outcomes. We've moved on to a regulation which will replace the previous directive, and the regulation will be legally binding in all member states, taking effect on the same date across all of those member states. It's important to note, though, that a lot of the technical details of the PPWR are still unknown and will be specified in further secondary legislation in delegated or implementing acts. And even though we are working within the framework of a regulation, there is still no total harmonization. So certain aspects, in those certain aspects, member states still have quite some freedom to impose higher targets. And also the transposition of the regulation, so there will still need to be a transposition of the regulation. The interregional cooperation agreement that we know in Belgium will have to be adapted to be conform with the specifications in the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. Some of the main objectives of the PPWR, first of all, to reduce the generation of packaging waste. For the first time in the history, there have been specific waste reduction targets, as well as to foster reuse and refill solutions. Second of all of the packaging on the EU market needs to be reusable or recyclable in an economically viable way by 2030. And thirdly, increase the uptake of recycled plastics in packaging. On this slide, I've presented some of the key milestones in the regulation. So the text was published on the 22nd of January 2025, will enter into force on the 20th day after publication, so that will be the 11th of February, and will finally enter into application on the 12th of August 2026. This leaves member states and economic operators around 18 months to prepare for some of the most important milestones. I've listed those milestones here on the slides, but during the rest of the presentation, we will delve further into them. Circular chain thinking. So all of these requirements that are written in the PPWR make the complete life cycle responsible. So it starts with the manufacturer. That can be the manufacturer of the empty packaging, for example, in the case of service packaging, or it can be the brand owner that has packaging designed under its own name and trademark. It's the manufacturer or the producer of the packaging that's responsible for the conformity assessment and is responsible for the drawing up of the technical documentation. Next person in the chain is the producer. The producer can be a manufacturer, importer, or a distributor, but as a general rule, there can only be one producer identified, and the producer is located in the same country as where he puts his packaging on the market. They, in turn, have to check that they only use packaging that is accompanied by the conformity declaration, and that conformity declaration will need to prove that the packaging complies with the essential requirements in the PPWR. Next party in the chain is the distributor. These can be wholesalers or any other party within the distribution chain. And finally, there is the final distributor, the retailer, or for example, the HoReCa sector, who's responsible for delivering the packaged good or packaged product to the end consumer. Let's start with recyclability. An important aspect here is the Delegated Act for Design for Recycling criteria, so a set of harmonized rules which will decide which packaging can be deemed recyclable or not, being adopted through a Delegated Act with a set of harmonized rules across the EU. The Delegated Act is set to be adopted before or by the 1st of January 2028, and will attribute recyclability performance grade to each unit of packaging based on its conformity with these criteria. So 2028, the Delegated Act will be published, and then as of 2030, the packaging will have to be at least in grade C in order to be further allowed on the market. A next milestone is the achievement of recyclability at scale by 2035. At scale refers to an annual quantity of recycled materials of at least 55% by packaging category. So whereas the compliance with the Design for Recycling criteria is about the theoretical recyclability, the recycled at scale criteria is about the real practical recycling happening within the EU. And as of 2038, only packaging in grade A and B will be allowed on the market. Now I will hand the floor over to my colleague Annemarie for a deep dive on this Delegated Act on Design for Recycling.
Thank you, Thomas. Next slide. I'll briefly explain the CEN work groups. So CEN is a standardization institute, CEN-CENELEC, and they received a mandate from the European Commission to draft the Design for Recycling guidelines for the PPWR. As Fost Plus, we have been following closely this work group and participating as expert to share our know-how on collection, sorting and recycling. There's two main work groups. There's work group 10, which has been working on plastics already for almost 2 years, with a lot of meetings which were done already, approximately 170 meetings of 2 to 4 hours with a lot of experts from the industry, from all parts of the chain actually. The deadlines there is that the technical content should be ready by the end of May this year. And then the foreseen date for the drafts, the CEN drafts to be published, it was August 25, but it has been delayed until November 25. At that time, everyone will be able to purchase the CEN drafts. For the moment, the content is still confidential. So what is in the CEN drafts? It are traffic light tables per material stream. For example, for the flexibles, there's a table for polypropylene flexibles, and there's one for polyethylene flexibles. There's there's green, yellow, and red. So green means packaging that the European Commission wants to encourage. Yellow, it's tolerate, and red is ban. And then, as Thomas already explained a little bit, I think by 27, there will be the calculation from the traffic light tables to the recyclability rate. This is still an unknown for the moment. CEN work groups will also help the European Commission to make the calculation model for that, but this will be done by the GRC, so the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. And then in 27, you will know the recyclability rate of, for example, you can have a rate of 80%, which leads to a grade of B. The other work group in CEN is for the other materials. So these are basically all other packaging materials apart from plastics. There's a sub-work group umbrella, it's the methodology. Then you have fiber-based, there's steel, aluminium, glass, wood, other materials. Also there, Fost Plus is contributing as expert and is following it up very closely. The foreseen date here is by the end of 25. They don't have an official mandate from the European Commission, but they have received a sort of a letter of intent because the European Commission values the work that has been done in Workgroup 10 on the plastics, and they give SEN the opportunity to also work out a similar model for the other materials. So the same here, there will be tables per material category, green, yellow, red, and the red products will be banned from 2030. So by the end of 25, we will know the traffic light tables, but the calculation model to the rate and then consequently the grades will only be known in 27 when the GRC has finalized that. And then from 2030, all packaging materials that have a recyclability rate lower than 70 will be banned from the market. Going from traffic light tables to rates and grades, so the timings here in 27, as mentioned, we will know what will be the rate and the grade, calculated based on the traffic light tables. Then in 2030, all packaging with a recyclability rate lower than 70% will be banned from the market. And then also in 2030, eco-modulation will need to be done accordingly to this A, B, and C grades in each country. How is the assessment of the packaging done? They are talking about packaging components and packaging constituents. A packaging component is, for example, a label or a cap or a lidding material, something that can be separated from the packaging by hand or using simple physical means. A packaging constituents, that's for example an ink, a barrier, a tie layer, an adhesive, and so on. Then also very important, especially for the members of Fost Plus for the moment, we are looking at recyclability in Belgium by assessing the elements of the packaging separately. The PPWR is doing that differently, so they are looking at how the packaging is discarded in the bin. So if in more than 80% of the cases the packaging ends up in the sorting factory in separate elements, then you can assess them separately. If not, the total packaging needs to be considered for recyclability grade and weight calculation. It's a bit a complex sentence. A good example here is a ketchup bottle. For a ketchup bottle, you need to open the cap and then you remove the lidding material. Usually the consumer throws away the lidding material and then several weeks later or so on, they throw away the bottle with the label and with the cap. So that means that the lidding material is assessed differently and all the rest is assessed together. So that means that for design for recycling, we need to design the packaging, how it's discarded together, how it will end up probably in the sorting stream. So for example, for trays with lidding, we see that a lot of trays, even though we ask consumers to remove the lidding material from the tray, they usually end up together in the stream, or at least it's approximately 50% of the trays still have their lidding on. So that means that we will need to assess a tray together with the lidding material and with a label if it has a label. In the methodology group of Workgroup 10, we are also still, there's still a discussion ongoing about removal of components, because this could be done by consumers, it could be done in the sorting process, it could also be done in the recycling process. So it depends a little bit on the opinions and the different countries. So this is, for example, something that still needs to be decided, how to address it. From a Fost Plus point of view, in the declaration, we will need to integrate this other way of assessing the packaging in MyFost. Then to assess in the future, so from 2030 on, is your packaging recyclable? You look at the traffic light table of the according packaging type. And if all components and constituents are classified in green and or yellow, then you don't need to do a test. You use the table to evaluate so how many yellow and green elements you have, and then based on the calculation method that the GRC will provide, you can calculate the final score, so the final rate of your packaging and hence the grade. If one of your components of your packaging is in red or constituents, then your recyclability score will be 0 and your packaging is banned from the market. If you don't find your answers in the standard, for example, for innovative products or innovative barrier layers or innovative closures or so on, there's protocols, there's testing protocols shared by CEN. For each stream there's a testing protocol, and then you can test the packaging and provide the results to the workgroup 10, and they will see in the revision period if it could be implemented in the traffic light table. Okay, then I hand over back to Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Annemarie. Of course, talking about recyclability, we also have to talk about the minimum recycled content targets introduced by the PPWR. Plastic packaging will have to contain a minimum percentage of recycled content. There are 4 different categories that can be identified. And it's important to note that any plastic part of packaging will have to contain this minimum percentage of recycled content, except for packaging whose plastic component represents less than 5% of the packaging's total weight. So take, for example, the case of a small PET bottle. In case the cap, the weight of the cap is more than 5% of the total weight of the bottle, still the cap of the PET bottle will also need to contain a minimum percentage of recycled content. And as you can see, 4 different categories. First of all, we have the single-use plastic bottles. This was a requirement that was already introduced by the Single-Use Plastics Directive, but it is repeated again in the PPWR with a small minor change, and this goes for all of the 4 different categories. The targets are set per packaging type and format and will be calculated as an average per manufacturing plant and year. What has changed? This average per manufacturing plant. While in the Single-Use Plastics Directive, the target was on the member state to be achieved, now we are looking specifically at the manufacturing plants at that level. A second target, 30% to be achieved by 2030, 50% by 2040, is contact-sensitive plastics, of which PET is a major component. And then the third and probably most challenging one is going to be the contact-sensitive plastics, not PET as a major component, because, in our opinion, this will require advanced and chemical recycling methods. So as Fost Plus, we are already exploring collaborations with chemical recyclers in order to ensure that our members and the Belgian market will have sufficient access to food-grade recyclates. Fourth category, for all other plastic packaging, which will need to contain at least 35% of recycled content by 2030 and 65% by 2040. Another horizontal exemption for compostable plastic packaging. They will not have to adhere to the targets, as well as for infant foods, medicinal products, and medical devices. The article on minimum recycled content targets also contains a mirror clause. This mirror clause stipulates that recyclates manufactured outside of the EU will need to adhere to the same environmental requirements as those that are produced within the EU. And finally, there is also a safeguard clause which allows the Commission to revise the targets in case of excessive pricing of recycled materials on the market or in case of lack of availability, and if integrating recycled content would pose a risk to animal and human health. This safeguard clause is only to be used in very extraordinary circumstances, though. Moving on to the topic of labeling, the PPWR also introduces harmonized labeling for several different aspects. There have been some discussions across the EU on sorting instructions, where some member states have developed their own sorting labels. This will now all be harmonized by the PPWR, and every packaging will need to contain a label indicating its material composition. So that can be, for example, plastic or glass. The same label will also need to be applied on the waste receptacle. So in the case of Belgium, that would be a label on the blue bag or on public bins indicating the same material composition as the packaging, so that the consumer can very easily match both labels and sort correctly. It is also stipulated by the PPWR that the financial contributions paid by the producers to EPR organizations such as Fost Plus will have to cover the costs of the labeling of waste receptacles. So in case we will need to change the labels on those public bins, for example, it will be borne through EPR contributions. A second aspect of the harmonized labeling is the information on plastic recycled content. If a producer decides to indicate the plastic recycled content of its packaging on pack, which is voluntary, they will have to do it according to the format that is going to be decided at the Commission level. And last but not least, also reusability of packaging. Reusable packaging will need to contain a label indicating its reusability, as well as a digital data carrier indicating more information about its reusability and how the system works. Packaging restrictions. So the PPWR introduces restrictions on the use of certain packaging formats. First of all, the single-use plastic grouped packaging. Second, there is the single-use plastic packaging for foods and beverages consumed within the premises in the HoReCa sector. I may remind you as well that there is a very similar ban which was introduced by the Royal Decree on single-use plastics at the Belgian level. Very lightweight plastic carrier bags, as well as single-use plastic packaging for pre-packed fresh fruit and vegetables of less than 1.5 kilograms, and single-use accommodation packaging intended for an individual booking, so the small hotel miniature packaging. Important to note here as well is that the Commission will come with a guidance explaining more about these specific restrictions, and they should do so by the 12th of February 2027. First in the European legislation on waste is that for the first time a target for the reduction of the generation of packaging waste per inhabitant has been introduced. So by 2030, member states have to ensure that 5% less waste is generated per inhabitant as compared to the situation in 2018. In 2035, this needs to be 10%, and in 2040, this needs to be minus 15%. Member states shall also ensure that EPR and DRS schemes dedicate a minimum share of their budget to finance reduction and prevention actions in order to achieve these ambitious targets. So next to reuse, the promotion of reuse, refill, and specific prevention actions, there are also a couple of other provisions in the PPWR aimed at reducing the generation of packaging wastes. Packaging, for example, shall be designed so that its weight and volume is reduced to the minimum without impacting the essential function, of course, of the packaging, preserving and protecting the goods. So this needs to be implemented by 2030. The exact assessment rules and the performance criteria are explained in more detail in Annex 4 of the regulation. Another provision is that the empty space in packaging, in grouped packaging, transport packaging, or e-commerce packaging should be maximum for 50%. And the space filled by filling materials should also be considered as empty space in this case. Another quite detailed slide, the reuse and refill obligations, which are of course the key elements of the Commission's plan to reduce packaging waste. We see that there are targets for 2030. I will not go into detail on the transport packaging part. My colleague from Valipac will more closely examine that. But there will be reuse targets for group packaging, as well as for e-commerce packaging and for beverage packaging. In case of beverage packaging, a very specific situation, it's the final distributor that will be obliged to meet those targets. And in this case, in 2030, 10% of their offering of beverage packaging should be offered in a reusable packaging. There are also targets for 2040, but they are not defined as hard targets. They are aspirational targets currently in the legislation. Very important to note, especially in the case of e-commerce packaging, is that the PPWR provides a horizontal exemption for cardboard boxes. In order to be able to talk about reuse, or to be classified as reusable packaging, the packaging needs to be part of a system for reuse. And a system for reuse also includes an incentive to ensure collection. This could be, for example, a deposit. A minimum number of rotation for this reusable packaging will also be set by the Commission in a delegated act for the most common packaging formats. And this delegated act is expected to be published by the 12th of February 2027. Also important to note is that member states may impose still higher targets, or in the case of beverage packaging, additional targets, because as of now, milk, wines, and spirits are excluded from the reuse targets, but the member state in its turn may still decide to expand the reuse targets also to those sectors. Another provision in the PPWR is that from the 1st of January 2030, final distributors with a sales area of more than 400 square meters will have to dedicate 10% of that sales, or sorry, shall endeavor to dedicate, so again, not a hard target, 10% of that sales area to refill stations for both food and non-food products. And specifically for the takeaway sector in HoReCa, final distributors will, by the 12th of February 27, need to provide an option for consumers to bring their own container to be filled, so a refill obligation. And by the 12th of February 2028, they will also need to provide an option of packaging within a system of reuse. Another hotly debated topic during the negotiations of the PPWR is the deposit and return systems. So the PPWR provides that member states have to ensure a 90% separate collection rate of these specific beverage packaging categories, namely single-use plastic beverage bottles and single-use metal beverage containers, the cans. The Commission has, during their webinar, confirmed that we're talking about two separate targets here. So the 90% needs to be achieved for the bottles as well as for the cans. And in order to achieve that 90% separate collection rate, the Commission mandates the setting up of deposit and return systems by the member states. However, there are some exemptions possible. If a member state can prove that it has achieved a collection rate above 80% in 2026, and the member state submits an implementation plan to achieve the 90% required in the legislation, they may ask for an exemption. Certain beverage packaging categories are also excluded, namely the packaging for wines, spirits, milk, and milk products. And member states may also choose to exempt the HoReCa sector under very specific conditions. Talking about the collection rates, we're talking about this 90–80%, but it has to be noted, though, that currently the calculation methods for this separate collection have not been defined yet on a European level, and they are expected to be so by the end of 2027. Another new introduction by the PPWR is the Register of Producers, which is, for us as Fost Plus, obviously a very important element as well. So member states are required to establish a producer register by the end of 2027, the beginning of 2028, the latest, and each producer shall be obliged to register in each member state where it puts packaging on the market. So not only will international companies that are active in Belgium have to register in the Belgian registry, they will have to do so in all of the member states where they are putting packaged goods on the market. If they are not registered in a member state, no packaging shall be made available on that market, so that equals a ban. There will be, at Belgian level, an impact on the de minimis, the de minimis being the threshold that we introduced at Belgian level. So producers putting less than 300 kilograms of packaging on the market annually, currently in Belgium, are not bound by the legal take-back obligation. However, in our reading of the PPWR, this exemption can no longer be maintained, meaning that every producer, even if they only put one packaging on the market, is still required to register in the register. Another new aspect for companies doing business across the EU is that they will need to appoint an authorized representative for EPR, which is a newly created function in each member state, other than the member state where it is currently established and makes packaging available for the first time directly to consumers. So we're mostly talking about e-commerce here. In other cases, if you're exporting to another country, there is a partner that can be identified as an importer. Then the importer will bear the extended producer responsibility. But in the case of direct sales to consumers, it is the company itself that will need to appoint the authorized representative. Additionally, member states may require an authorized representative also for third country producers, so those that are located outside of the EU. Luckily, however, for the smaller companies, producers that make less than 10,000 kilograms per year of packaging available can make use of simplified reporting procedures. This is reporting per material, so for example, only plastics, paper, cardboard, glass, and not going into more detail in the declaration. Last but not least, online platforms will also have a role to play. They shall obtain from the producers information on the registration in the register and a self-certification of compliance with EPR requirements before sellers are able to sell on their platforms. I think to conclude, our message is be prepared. A lot of the technical details are not yet known, but still it will take some time to adapt, and I think it's very important that businesses are aware of the big changes that are coming, that from a household packaging perspective. But of course, I think Ingrid, our next colleague, who I would like to give the floor to now, will agree that this also plays an important role for commercial and industrial packaging, and that we need to be prepared.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues of Fost Plus, for the invitation. My name is Ingrid, and I work at Valipac. Valipac is the EPR scheme for commercial and industrial packaging in Belgium. So we are going to talk now about the impact of the PPWR on commercial and industrial packaging. But first of all, why should you listen to what follows? Because you've been listening to Thomas, you've been listening to Anne-Marie, and you've learned a lot today. But I would ask you to stay a little bit longer, because what follows has an impact on your business. Because you all need, you clients of Fost Plus, you all need transport packaging to transport your goods to other companies. Why is it important? Because as you can see on this slide, for 1 ton household packaging put on the Belgian market, I mean 1 ton single-use packaging, household packaging, there is also 1 ton commercial and industrial packaging. So the quantities put on the market are equivalent, but of course the mix between materials is slightly different, with paper and cardboard as the major component in C&I packaging, and glass, for instance, for household packaging. One of the targets of the PPWR, and Thomas explained already a lot of it, is the minimum target of recycled content. Because by January 2030, any plastic part of packaging shall contain a minimum percentage of recycled content recovered from post-consumer plastic waste. So the 3-4 targets apply to household packaging, and the last one, maybe the most ambitious one, apply to other packaging, other plastic packaging, which means also commercial and industrial packaging. So let's have maybe a deep dive into the type of plastic packaging concerned. 35% post-consumer recycled content in C&I plastic packaging, strapping bags, drums, big bags, film, buckets, canisters, pallets, boxes, plastic boxes, and so on. So it's quite ambitious, and we are now going to see where we stand today. Yes. According to the reports of Valipac clients, we know today that there is more or less 1.5% post-consumer recycled content in C&I plastic packaging. So over the past 2 years, 2022, 2023. And the target is 35% by 2030, which means that we will have to go up to 35,000 tons by 2030. It means that we will all have to speed up with the targets if we want to reach the target. How can Valipac help you reaching those targets? We try to help our clients and stimulate them to use recycled content in plastic packaging with a platform giving information about producers of plastic packaging offering packaging with certified recycled content. And which is also nice to know is that Valipac offers a bonus of 100 euro per ton of PCR contained in plastic packaging reported to Valipac, so that the bonus for Valipac's clients. Another important target in the PPWR for C&I packaging is the reusable target. We will start with the easy one, and the easy one is the target for transport between member states. As from 2030, there is a target of 40% reusable packaging, reusable transport packaging in a system of reuse. And it applies to industrial sales packaging, such as a drum or an IBC or a foldable box. But it also applies to transport packaging, such as pallets. Yes. And the most tricky one is maybe the target for transports within the same member state and between sites of the same company within the European Union, with an absolute target of 100%. So all transport packaging and all industrial sales packaging will have to be reusable in a system of reuse. We have to note that cardboard boxes are excluded from those reuse targets. But we don't have any idea if other types of cardboard packaging are excluded from the reusable targets. Where do we stand today in Belgium as far as commercial and as far as reusable packaging are concerned? We must admit that the Belgian industry does it quite good, because today there are 82% of industrial packaging which are already reusable in a system of reuse. And if we exclude cardboard, we reach a ratio of 92%, which is quite high. Okay, this was in a nutshell the impact of the PPWR on C&I packaging. But of course, there is a lot more to explain. So if you are a client of Valipac, keep an eye on your mailbox for our next newsletter. And if you are not a client of Valipac, you can always contact me and send me an email. Thank you, And now my colleagues for the Q&A maybe.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your knowledge with us. And I think that now we have the time for some questions. The questions. I think this one is maybe more for you, Anne-Marie. Will national design for recycling guidelines still be valid after 2030?
No, they will not be valid anymore. So I think that's a positive thing from the PPWR, that there will be harmonized recycling design for recycling guidelines over Europe.
Okay.
So one definition for each country.
Okay. Thank you. You want to add something else?
No, it's okay.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Is the digital deposit return system that was tested in Belgium compatible with the minimum requirements for deposit return system in Annex 10 of the PPWR? Thomas? Maybe
I think I will take that one. It's a very good question with quite a complex answer. But in general, in our view, yes, it is compatible. The minimum requirements in Annex 10 state that an alternative collection channel, such as the blue bag, can also qualify for within the minimum requirements of deposit return systems if it is authorized by the national authority for that purpose and if it can guarantee food contact quality recycling. So taking the example of the blue bag, we can also can already ensure food contact quality recycling because we're already doing it today. We are recycling bottle to bottle from material in the blue bag. That leaves us, of course, the big question, the authorization by the national competent authority. So I would say, in short, it would depend on the decision that is taken at national level, whether to allow for alternative collection channels in deposit return systems or not. Maybe additionally, I would like to add that Annex 10 also, or the minimum requirements in Annex 10 also state or mention a return to retail obligation, meaning that retailers will be responsible or will be obligated to accept for return deposit-bearing packaging that they also sell. However, how to fill in this exact return to retail obligation is not specified. It's only specified that deposits should be redeemed without an obligation for the consumer to purchase any additional goods.
Okay, thank you. Within the framework of the minimum recycled content, as an unpacker of products packaged outside the EU, should we also require our supplier to use at least 35% recycled content by 2030? I think maybe Ingrid, you can answer it.
Yes, thank you. In principle, all suppliers will have to prove that their packaging contain the minimum recycled content percentages. And as a customer, European customer, you will have to require suppliers to attest the ratio of recycled content. So it is, as a matter of fact, mandatory that you ask your suppliers to deliver a conformity assessment.
Okay, thank you. Maybe another question for you, Ingrid. Is there a difference between... No, it's not for Ingrid, or yes?
Oh, yes. I can take it, I can take it,
Is there a difference between packaging that is recyclable and packaging made for recycled material?
Yes, indeed. It is not because packaging is recyclable that it contains recycled content, and vice versa. It is not because packaging contains recycled material that it is recyclable. But what is sure is that by 2030, all packaging will have to be recyclable and they will all have to contain recycled content.
Thank you. Another question concerning labeling. Will the individual's labels of some country have, like the Trimont in France, expire?
Yes, I'd like to take this one.
Okay.
So there were multiple questions on labeling, but yes, indeed, this is the goal, that labels like the Triman in France should expire. An example there is that the Commission started an infringement procedure against France for the Triman label, and I think in December or in November last year, they issued a reasoned opinion as well at France why the requirement to put on a national label goes beyond what can reasonably expected within this whole procedure, and therefore France should put itself in conformity and scrap the Triman obligation. Otherwise, it could turn into a case at the level of the European Court of Justice. Maybe some additional information on the labeling. So currently, there is already some work ongoing in the Joint Research Council. So that's the research arm of the European Commission, working on this labeling scheme. And we are closely following that as well. At Fost Plus, we have somebody participating in these meetings. And the starting point will be the Nordic labeling system. So that's the example they used for the discussions on how to build this harmonized European label. And it will take a lot of inspiration from what's currently being done in Scandinavia.
Thank you. Another question from the chat. I need to read it, sorry. I will ask the question as the person in the chat asked it. Do I understand correctly that a foreign company only needs to appoint an authorized representative when they sell directly to end consumer user? So in case of sales to a retailer or wholesaler, no AT is needed, like SUP in Germany.
That's again quite a complex question, but in my reading that would indeed be the case. So unless an economic operator in, for example, Germany can be identified, then we're talking about a sale directly to end consumer users, because there's no other player within the value chain that can be identified as a producer within the foreign country. So in that case, we're talking about a sale directly to end consumers. An authorized representative is needed. However, if you're selling to a retailer or wholesaler based from another country, then it's that retailer or wholesaler who can be considered as the importer on its national market, and therefore there is a contact point for the local authorities. So an authorized representative is not needed. So in my reading, an authorized representative is only needed when selling directly to end consumers.
Okay, thank you. Clear. Maybe one more question? No, it's okay. I think it was a lot for today. So if we didn't tackle your question here today in this chat, in this Q&A, please feel free to send the question to us, and our team will come back to you with an answer. I thank you, all of you, for being here, for watching this webinar. It was really interesting. Thank you, all the three of you, for being here and for sharing your wisdom with everyone. Thanks a lot. And as I said, feel free to come back to us. The webinar was recorded, so we will also send it as a replay for you, so you can also look back at this. So thank you very much. Good afternoon and goodbye.